into the
Well,
UK?
I think what you bring up is some really interesting points is, people know what they've been taught, and
Mm.
we're all products of a system. And you know I always say that, hey, give people the benefit of the doubt, like they're working at the limits of their understanding.
Mm.
Until a few years ago, it was really difficult to see some of these things. We didn't give people the tools. We weren't looking. Jumping and landing with your feet out, no one was really talking about it. We took it on and just said, hey, this is going to stop the ACL injury landslide. I think one of the things that you make a good point about, and it's vital to understand, is that in our own culture and our own conditioning, we value things by 1 and 0. Did I complete the task or not? Which is like, hey, I made you some toast, but I burned down the house. It doesn't matter if I burned down the house because I made you some toast, right? You got some toast. What's the problem?
Mm.
I lifted the weight, and and I can do that a lot until I can't. And we sort of we mistake our genetic inheritance and this task completion mindset, with the way that we should always be doing things, or the way, one of the things that Carl Paoli, who is a brilliant he just wrote a book called Freestyle, which I highly recommend people get. Carl Paoli, he's a coach out of our gym. He's a national champion gymnast from Spain, brilliant thinker and lecturer. And one of his definitions of functional movement is you've got to come out unharmed at 1 rep or to 1 billion cycles. And suddenly you're like, 1 million cycles, really? Like, is that really? Well, if you take 10,000 steps in a day, you're at 1 million cycles in 3 or 4 months. And if there's 420 steps every 400 meters, that's 200 duty cycles on your knee in 400 meters. So run 1,600 meters, and you're at, do the math. You've got 800 duty cycles at 3 times body weight on that leg, and that's only running 1,600 meters. So run a mile, and you're behind. And so what ends up happening, I think, is, and I think where we've made really good inroads is that we framed the changes in function in terms of performance. And what we know was that we're going to get you. You're going to, the level of conversation we have and the places, you call us for one of a couple reasons. One is that you're losing and you hate it and you don't know why. And so we talk to you and you stop losing. And we have the same conversation. Hey, your mechanics suck and you're inefficient. Right? Not, how many times a week are you squatting? Yes, that's a separate conversation. Mm-hmm. You're injured and we're going to get you because you're tired of being injured, or you're afraid of getting injured. The whole thing comes around. So what we did was, instead of kind of talking about this injury prevention model, because that doesn't work. Hey, do these things and maybe you won't get cancer when you're 70. Well, I'm not 70, and I can smoke cigarettes and eat little chocolate donuts and win the world championship. But when we saw that, when we could prove to people that their efficiency gains and mechanical gains corresponded directly to improved performance in wattage and poundage and output, mm-hmm. and they weren't stiff, et cetera, quality of life. And we basically get injury prevention in the trade. And so, what happens, and this is very, very human, is that we have so many things to focus on. And what we end up doing is sort of waiting for a set of lagging indicators. And that lagging indicator is pain, swelling, numbness, tingling, loss of range of motion, decreased force production, waiting for something to pop up. Mm-hmm. The problem is, if you've ever been in a fight or, been in the middle of a competition, you can't even hear the pain signal. That pain signal, movement signal in your brain are the same signal, up the same pathway. I think it's the DCML pathway. Correct me if I'm wrong in the brain sim. But what ends up happening is, when you stub your finger and you're like, shake your hand out, what you're doing is you're blocking the pain signal. So you actually can't even hear the pain signal in all that noise. So you're not getting all the pre-cues. Second thing is that most athletes, or anyone who's ever done any suffering, has practiced down-regulating those pain signals. Like, everyone hurts. But and so you can't hear the noise. And third, once the adrenaline is going, the dirty secret about boxing or fighting is once the adrenaline is going, you can be shot to the face and you might break your knuckle and you don't even feel it. You feel it later. That's the little dirty secret about fighting, right? And so our point is, hey, we can't wait around for pain to discover we have a problem, because now we're putting out fires instead of getting about the work. And most of the therapies we've seen are sort of related around to, hey, let me deal with that tightness pain that you're seeing. So I go see my ART practitioner, and all I do is keep kind of sputtering around. So what we saw is that if we systematically had people sort of be aware, engage in a strength and conditioning program that was a movement sort of movement practice. Yoga is a movement practice. Pilates is a movement practice. An efficient strength and conditioning program that forces you to go overhead and do things like look like pistols and basic gymnastics and things. You don't have to do pistols, but if you're doing basic tumbling, you're ending up in a fully hip closed, ankle closed position. You know, those positions you've got to be in order to have normal range of motion. The problem is that many of us don't express that. You know, we don't have normal ankle range of motion, hip range of motion. And suddenly when our back hurts, because the system is so stiff down below, we end up transmitting a ton of energy. You know, my wife is like, she's an attorney. She's a world champion herself, but she's an attorney. And she's like, you know, I can see it now. If I can see it, what's going on? You know, and we're talking about is that when we see people walk, we shouldn't see a lot of rotation in the pelvis. And if you're missing hip extension, i.e. your hip is tight because you sit all day long, or your quads are short or whatever, you wear high heel shoes, because you can't extend your hip, you end up swinging your leg out. And when you swing your leg out, you end up creating a lot of rotation around the pelvis. And you can actually see, and this is more prevalent in women, spine organized, looking good and jacked, and there's one hinge point. And the pelvis is rotating around that hinge point. And if you look at people walking down the street, you'll be like, oh, I can tell exactly where they're going to herniate, exactly where they're going to have an annular tear, and exactly where their back pain is. And you're like, because I can see it. Why? Because if that person just had their normal range of motion, then the mechanics start to improve right away. What we know is that most of the pain problem, you know, I've lectured at Stanford to the med students there, and Stanford University, and you know, 50% of the problems a physician will see are musculoskeletal in nature. They're pain related around that. You know, and then the problem is our physicians are poorly set up to address those issues. And so the question is, if 50% of the problems a physician is set up to deal with poorly, you know, what's going on? We feel that pain is really easy to abolish. You know, in fact, the American physio model is that, hey, we get you out of pain, you're healed, right? You're functional again. You can brush your teeth and clean yourself off through the loo and get up off the ground. But that has nothing to do with the fact that you've resolved your movement dysfunction, changed your range of motion. And if you go into any most physio or chiro places or osteo clinics, it's people doing very low-level exercise. It's almost like they're saying, well, just we noticed that you had rickets. Take this drop. Don't go in the sun, but just get enough vitamin D so that you stop having rickets. And that's what we're doing a lot of. And what we feel like is, you know, that's perpetuating a myth, the fact that people aren't sophisticated enough to take a crack at themselves. And what we know through our website, through the information we get, through the tens of millions of episodes viewed, through what we see is that people are sophisticated, and when you give them really simple guidelines and templates, they'll be able to fix themselves. And when you tie that to something that matters to them, like their ego, like running faster or, you know, being more sexy, then you get them, you know? And you get injury prevention in the long haul. So, I mean, I think you really nailed it. And it's vital that we keep in mind. In fact, you know, one of my senseis is a coach named Mike Bergner. Mm-hmm. He's an Olympic lifting coach, right? His daughter-in-law is an Olympian. His son is as an Olympian. And, you know, Coach was this national team level coach, but he also taught children how to Olympic lift. And he really made it clear to me that, hey, look, his skill set and the way he taught and the progressions were contiguous from teaching, you know, 12-year-olds how to Olympic lift up to the national team. And what really kind of made clear for me was that I have to be able to scale my thinking, and it has to be able to account for all that phenomenon. Because what we see is that there's a lot of very specialized, I work with you because you're a master, but you can't scale that to 50 people, you know? Oh, and it only works for people between 20 and 40. It doesn't work for elderly, or it doesn't work for our young kids. And we only hold systems to be valuable when, you know, like Russian STEM is a great example. Like, we know Russian STEM can do amazing things to recruit things, but no one has 50 Russian STEM units. And is that the most efficient way to, boy, it seems like your butt would fire if you just opened up your front of your hip. You know, so, you know, there's a lot of ways to make sure that we're doing it. And so now I think we're getting to the conversation of best practice. Yeah. And now we're back in the conversation of public health. You know, Arsenal, let's take that as a football team. You know, recently in the last year, hired strength footballers. You still there? Got me?
Yeah.
You still hear me?
I did lose you for a bit. You went
You there, Chris?
a bit fuzzy.
Okay. All right. So, but what's interesting is now, what we're seeing is, well, best practice is starting to come in. The physios, we're the physios of the judo national team. We're starting to see that, I think you've lost me again, green light. Okay. So we've started to see that people are getting the message, and we're able to take best practices across platforms, and we're starting to scale it into other systems. And I really do believe that a modern strength and conditioning system, most of the sports we play demand upright torso. And if you front squat, then you're teaching upright torso, and I quickly can tell if you have enough range of motion. Trying to just get to the place where everyone can see that.
I lost you again there. Can you repeat from the upright torso bit?
Oh, just, the issue is that, we're seeing that most sports require an upright torso, right? And the upright torso demands are reflected well in something that looks like an overhead squat or a front squat. Mm-hmm. And, not only do I have this great training stimulus, but I also have a quick diagnostic tool that, red light, green light. Okay, there you are. You back? Chris?
Hello.
I'm here.
Right.
Okay.
Do you know if it's your end or my end?
I think it's your end. I can't tell. Who knows? It's the internet.
Nah. Okay, we'll roll with it. We'll see what
happens.
All
right, so what's happening is, a coach like Dan John says, hey, can you overhead squat your body weight? And what he knows is no one can just come in and overhead squat their body weight. And that being able to overhead squat is one of the best diagnostic tools for keeping your spine straight. Do you have full range of motion control in your shoulder? And do you have full sufficiency in your ankles and hips? And what we see very fast is that people can't even overhead squat a bar. Mm-hmm. Can't over squat with their hands up. And to be able to even overhead squat your body weight, you're probably going to have to do a lot of training to be able to get there. And so the diagnostic tool is also the stimulus. And at the same time, I can really start to, what we're finding and what we're trying to do is say, look, the physio is for the emergency. The physio is when you're stumped. What we want to do is make it so easy that the strength and conditioning teacher, the movement teacher, should be able to see these things. If your kids are walking with their feet out like ducks, you should be able to identify that that's not a good position and say, hey, hon, you need to walk with your feet straight. Why? Because humans walk with their feet straight, and what you're doing is the equivalent of rounding your back when you pick something up off the ground. Like, everyone understands that we shouldn't do that. Mm-hmm. So if we can get to the level where, in the 1970s, this is a great Cook example, our gym teachers, our PE teachers, did a lot of screening for scoliosis. What we do is we would fold forward, and then the PE teacher would see if your spine went left or spine went right? They could tell if you had a scoliosis by bending over and touching your toes. And so here's a PE teacher who's not skilled in this, but can tell if it's right or goes left, and makes a diagnosis or sends out the referral to the edging with the parent, with the coach.